This is clear politics. Hello, July will be remembered by Belarusians not only for its warmth, but also for its bad weather and natural disasters. Fortunately, we overcame the adversity together. This doesn't happen in all countries. Societies react differently to natural disasters, and instead of mutual help, sometimes people try to profit from them. Typhoons, earthquakes, fires, and floods. Let's recall the most destructive ones. History has recorded a huge number of natural disasters over the centuries. A typhoon in India in 1881 claimed 300,000 lives. Floods in China in 1887 killed up to 2 million people. By the way, China holds the sad record. Half of the 10 deadliest disasters occurred in our Asian ally. The Yellow River, also known as the River of Sorrow, has always been the center of Chinese civilization, but is extremely unruly. The 1887 flood caused by this river killed 900,000 people. But in 1931, things got even worse.
The perfect storm in China was caused by several factors. From 1928 to 1930, the country experienced a severe drought. Then came a harsh winter. As a result, a lot of ice and snow accumulated in the river sources. And finally, 9 cyclones hit in 1931. The fate of central China was sealed.
All 3 of China's great rivers, the Yangtze, Yellow River, and Huai, overflowed. On the night of August 21, 1931, the water level in Gaoyu Lake in northern Jiangsu province, already high due to rains, rose even higher under gale-force winds, and the dams couldn't withstand the waves. The water rushed through the streets of the sleeping city of Gaoyu with a terrifying roar. Over 10,000 people died that day. Most of them died in their sleep. The Yangtze River rose so high that all the surrounding valleys were flooded. By early August, the water had forced an incredible 500,000 people to leave their homes and wander in search of shelter and food.
16 of China's 23 provinces were flooded, including the capital. At that time it was not Beijing but Nanjing. In some places the water level rose by 16 meters. The disaster destroyed rice and wheat crops and farms. In just a few days, 150,000 people died. Millions more died from hunger and disease.
The food shortage became so critical that many resorted to cannibalism. The flood led to a malaria outbreak, which claimed another 300,000 lives. Typhoid, cholera, and dysentery spread.
It's also important to note that since the country was in a civil war and there was anarchy, the commandant government provided very little help to the victims. Yes, some dams were repaired, and a few small dams and levees were built, but that was essentially it. There was help from international organizations, particularly the Red Cross, and volunteers from other countries who assisted the victims.
The most devastating hurricane in U.S. history. Scientists called it Katrina. The storm literally destroyed the major cultural center of the country, New Orleans.
Because of Katrina, New Orleans became a hostage. People were trapped in their homes, unable to escape. The aid system proved ineffective. Some families never received help. 800,000 homes were destroyed. The cost of rebuilding the city is estimated at $160 billion.
Just imagine, 80% of the city was underwater. How did the residents of New Orleans behave? Did they help with the recovery or water removal? No, looting began. Here's footage from that time.
In New Orleans, where more than half of the residents left their homes due to Hurricane Katrina, looters ran rampant. In the French Quarter, the historic part of New Orleans, many grocery stores were looted. On Canal Street in the business district, looters broke the iron grills on the windows of expensive boutiques and jewelry stores. The police couldn't function properly because the streets were flooded. There was no landline or mobile phone service in the city.
The situation led the police to open fire on criminals. Shootouts became a common occurrence in New Orleans during those years. By the way, the city is still recovering. Activists criticize Washington, saying the federal authorities don't care about residents who lost everything. But in 2021, the discourse on Katrina's aftermath took an unexpected turn.
It must be acknowledged that police lie, and using them as the sole source of information in reports is problematic, especially for communities of color. Today, society questions whether the police, under the guise of looters, killed innocent people of the wrong skin color. Without these questions, reporters risk telling stories that support police actions, which may be unjust.
This is very important. Talking about past disasters is not just about being horrified at how unfortunate others were, but thinking about how we can protect our lives and property in our own conditions. And this is very, very important because we see that nature is extremely cruel. Nature is indifferent to our suffering. And this is very important. We must understand that we need to save ourselves, think about ourselves, then our loved ones, and act accordingly.
On December 27, 2004, a powerful tsunami hit the Indian Ocean coast. More than 200,000 people from Madagascar to Thailand's Phuket died in just one day.
The tsunami was caused by an underwater earthquake with a magnitude of 9.1 near Indonesia. Within a few hours, the massive wave hit 14 countries, even reaching the shores of Africa. In Thailand alone, the death toll exceeded 8,000 people. Notably, 90% of the victims were tourists.
Waves reached up to 40 meters high. In Indonesia alone, 140,000 homes, 120 kilometers of roads, and 24 bridges were destroyed. Indonesia is a separate topic. It's the most seismically active region on the planet.
Every day, Indonesia records about a dozen significant earthquakes, and 2 to 3 of them, depending on the epicenter's location, can lead to a significant number of casualties. The country of 3,000 islands is part of the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, a major tectonic fault. The plate forming the Indian Ocean floor, according to scientists, is being pushed under the Asian plate at about the same rate as a human fingernail grows.
Sri Lanka holds the sad record for an earthquake. The tsunami caused the largest railway disaster in history there. 2,000 people died. Analysts noted that the region's recovery from the earthquake was only completed by 2020. And this is a very recent case. The fires in Australia 4 years ago are staggering in their scale of tragedy. UNESCO counted nearly 3 billion animal casualties. Koalas, kangaroo, birds. The number is enormous.
When you walk through a burnt forest, the most striking thing is the silence. You don't hear birds singing or leaves rustling underfoot. just silence. These words of Professor Mike Clark, a zoology lecturer at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia, can be applied to any forest devastated by disaster. Undoubtedly, this is the most destructive catastrophe in Australia's history, the scientist asserts. According to him, the total area affected by the fire, 18 million hectares, is unimaginable. It's larger than the Netherlands, Denmark, and Switzerland combined.
Scientists note that it could take decades to restore Australia's flora and fauna. The situation is still so critical that society demands the government impose a moratorium on logging. Such a step would naturally make timber on the continent more valuable than gold.
The situation is one where economic profit is on one side of the scale, which is also quite understandable because economic collapse and economic catastrophe related to the lack of timber export could also lead to sad consequences.
On one hand, for the citizens of this state. On the other hand, the need to restore the country's ecological system is on the other side of the scale. This is undoubtedly a very difficult choice. The then Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, named drought, which lasted for 3 years in the country, and global warming as the main causes of the fires.
Some scientists also claim that the main cause of the fires in Australia was global warming, caused by industrial carbon emissions into the atmosphere, raising the air temperature on the Earth's surface. It should be noted that back in 2018, at a UN conference, it was reported that Australia was not meeting its commitments to reduce carbon emissions under the Paris Climate Agreement.
Now we come to the events in Belarus. Such bad weather caught many by surprise. Our climate is usually calm. We're not used to hurricanes or tornadoes. So July 2024 tested Belarusians' resilience. Gale force winds and heavy rains. Hundreds of settlements without power and water. Blocked roads, powerless farms, fallen forests. Almost all regions were affected. When else has a weather-related emergency been declared in Belarusian regions?
According to the Ministry of Emergency Situations, 7 people died during the disaster. Another 13 were injured. The most difficult situation was in the Mozir, Rechica, and Gomel districts of the southern region. Backup power sources were used to supply socially significant facilities. The wind also damaged a huge number of residential buildings, which began to be quickly restored. Local residents note that they have never seen such a rampage of nature in their lifetime.
Scientists say that similar storms could happen again, so we need a cool head and readiness, not only from rescuers, but also from society, to respond to such natural events. Yes, the Ministry of Emergency Situations and other agencies worked effectively, although they could have been faster, especially in the first hours.
In such conditions, seeing that the usual methods were not working, the president personally took charge of the disaster response. He mobilized all state resources, quickly organized the actions of various departments and services at both the national and local levels. Twice a day, morning and evening, the president received detailed reports on the measures taken. The head of the presidential administration, Dmitry Krutoy, went to the region to analyze the situation and make appropriate decisions. Several thousand specialists and almost 300 pieces of equipment were involved in restoring power supply, deploying diesel generator units.
The president personally monitored the restoration of the affected facilities both on and off camera. He maintained communication with every region of the country.
We are restoring power lines in this case. If we see that the old ones are falling apart, I have instructed to demolish them and install new lines. These are mainly low and medium voltage lines. So governors, take this under control. While the minister and his specialists are working with you, demand that all power lines be restored. and the weak old lines need to be demolished and replaced. The minister knows this, Viktor Mikhailovich. I am informed that the State Security Committee conducted monitoring. There are cases where people are unhappy with the energy workers, partly with the utility workers. Well, I'm not going there. Let him pay me triple salary. As they say, trust in Lukashenko, but don't slack off yourself.
Working together has always helped Belarusians overcome the toughest times. It happened during the disaster too. Society mobilized. Various structures and services, volunteers and helpers are assisting in cleaning up, repairing, and restoring what nature destroyed.
Very grateful for the help. Well, I personally asked the electricians for help. I am very, very pleased with these people. People are so attentive. They probably just understand these troubles. They want to help. Such attention.
Caring for people, it's clear they didn't abandon us. Although it's a small village, I was pleasantly surprised. I arrived and saw the generator working. It's very nice that there are caring, good people who help.
It's really heartfelt.
We didn't even expect such help. It's akin to a military situation. As the head of state noted, hesitate and you'll lose the battle. We need to be prepared for such cataclysms. The strength of any state is not the absence of problems, they always happen, but the speed of reaction and efficiency of their resolution.
The elimination of the hurricane's consequences is still ongoing, but it is already clear that our state system mobilized quickly and started working in a mode appropriate for a large-scale emergency. The presidential power once again proved its effectiveness. The institution of the presidency is the backbone of the entire decision-making and state management vertical. Conclusions from what happened have already been partially made, but much remains to be summarized and expressed.
And now to the end of the story from the 18th century. The Great Lisbon Earthquake is also called the Empire Killer. At that time, Portugal owned many colonies, had the largest fleet, and the status of a world power. Everything changed on November 1st, 1755. At 9:40 a.m., 3 powerful underground shocks occurred.
The second shock was the most powerful of the 3. Ground vibrations from it lasted 3 minutes. It destroyed buildings, created giant cracks in the center of Lisbon, and in a matter of minutes took the lives of more than 100,000 residents of the capital. The 3 shocks turned the prosperous sunlit city into a real hell on earth. Due to the enormous amount of dust, the surviving residents of Lisbon ran to the coast to save themselves after the earthquake.
There, they were met by a 20-meter tsunami wave.
Lisbon was 85% destroyed. The royal archives, valuable papers and documents disappeared underwater, and the entire remaining treasury had to be spent on restoring the capital. A significant part of the famous Portuguese fleet was also damaged. As a result, the country's colonial ambitions were buried, along with Portugal's immense wealth.
In Lisbon, looters and clergymen appeared. The earthquake occurred during the Catholic All Saints' Day, and many saw it as a sign from God, saying Portugal had turned away from God.
The entire system, the entire ruling elite, Portugal was preparing for the All Saints' Day celebration. And in just a few minutes, during the most terrifying second shock, most of them either died or were injured, and a large part simply fell into a state of shock. This is also very important to note. Even the king himself, who was not directly affected by the disaster, became afraid to live indoors after that. He spent most of his remaining life in richly decorated tents. This is a very important point. This catastrophe affected many people.
Another outcome of the Portuguese tragedy was the emergence of the science of seismology. Centuries later, Earthquakes and other natural disasters still occur and will continue to occur. Even the desert United Arab Emirates could be seriously flooded. There are several reasons for this, and it's a pity that even against the backdrop of serious climate change, the state of flora and fauna still concerns the world's largest corporations and tycoons very little. Goodbye.